Welcome to block number 8 of our miniature block of the month for 2022. This block is called Jack in the Pulpit, and it's located in our diagram on this side of the sample. Fairly simple block. It won't take very many pieces to put together. This is what the layout looks like in terms of construction, and here is our actual size sample. So we're going to be creating the center block first. That's our unit A. And we will be making 4 of the corner setting triangles. They're all identical. I've left some numbers off for you to examine and play with and see if you want to continue with this pattern. You can assemble it differently, or you can transfer these numbers onto the blank ones. But all the information you need is on the first one. Cutting our pieces is very simple, as we will be working with one size of square, a 2 1/4 inch, and also a strip that's 1 1/4 by 4. We'll be cutting 6 squares diagonally once of our light, 4 of our medium, and 1 square for the center of our block from the dark. Let's set aside the pieces that we need for each unit. So for our A, we'll require the centerpiece, center square, 4 of our mediums, and all of our dark strips. The rest will be divided evenly between our 4 B units. So let's get to the machine and start putting them together. Okay, let's begin with our unit A. We have fabrics that we had put in a pile for this unit. And we're going to start by just folding between 1 and 2 as we normally do to get a nice fresh crease. And while we have this before we set things up, we'll just make some pinholes with our straight pins so that we know where this seam begins and ends. Because once we fold the paper over, can't really tell otherwise. So we're going to align this square that's a 2 1/4 along this edge, and this is right side out. This is my right side, and the wrong side is to the back of the paper. We're going to make sure that we have the same amount between our 2 pins. Just dropped one on the floor. All right. Okay, so we have the same amount on each side. We have about a 1/4 inch. I'm going a little scant just to be sure that we have enough on the other 3 sides. And then we're going to take one of these right angle triangles of our medium and match it up to, with the long side, this square. Again, centering it so we have the same amount of fabric on each side to create the proper seam. Now nothing's secured, and you could use a little bit of glue to stick that in place. I'm just going to go and set it up. So we have a 1/4 inch, lost another pin again, but I can see my hole. So we have that amount here and that amount on the other side. We'll bring it to this machine bed. Make sure it's even. We'll pull that pin out of the way. And we've got a short seam allowance. Let's make sure that we've got it just slightly smaller than 2.5. So it's at 2.3. And because we're going to only go these short distances, I think that might be best. Okay, we went one stitch beyond here, but that's okay. It'll secure it. We don't need to go into that seam allowance because we don't have the dashed line until we make that last border piece. Okay, nice trims. Fold it open. And we'll give it a quick press on our piece of batting over here. And for those of you who've been watching or are actually watching now, for my faithful viewers, I wanted to show you that regarding this pressing tool. It comes with a really lovely little stand so that you can put it on your surface. But you'll notice it didn't always stay where it was supposed to be. I can't tell you how many times I've melted this thing and gone to my husband and said, help, clean this off. So I've come up with a couple of different things that might work. I have used a metal soup spoon on my work table beside me. Then I don't need to worry about the heat. But more recently, I've been enjoying a bit of porcelain or pottery. So now I can lay this down. I don't need to worry. It's close by and it's going to absorb any heat that it takes, especially if I forget to turn it off. So this is my current stand rather than the little melted plastic piece that didn't always hold where it was supposed to. Look at that. Lovely. All right, back to sewing. Okay, once we've got it pressed, we're going to turn it over and look for number 3. We have 1 and 2, we're going to 3. The little paper folder. Let's get this crease, and we're going to go opposite sides. It'll be easier for pressing and the way that the seams go as we move along. Quick press, quick trim, a scant quarter, so we can use the little black line on our ruler, or if you have an add a quarter, that's fine. There's ample fabric that we'll be trimming with the way that we've cut pieces, because I don't like cutting eighths. I give you quarters and that gives you extra. All right, now we don't need to mark the sides because we have our piece nice and square, and we'll take our next medium, align the right side up to the right side of our piece. Let's just get you in place here. And have it equidistant from each edge of the square. Okay, move it up so you can see a little bit better. When the mat actually matches the fabrics, it kind of disappears in there. Okay, so we got a little dog ear on each side. I'll give it a little scooch this way to make sure everything's nice and flat under my fingers. And I'll take it to the machine bed for some stitching. We're going to go just from that length of that seam. We don't have to do any more than that. I don't know if you noticed or could tell, but I'm using the go button on my faff, which is great just for this portion. I find when I'm doing the seams, it's a little bit harder to start and stop. And I like the control of the foot pedal. But for the most part, it's amazing how often I can get away with just using the go button. If you have that on your machine and you haven't tried it, you'll find that your feet, your ankle, your knees, your hips will actually thank you for not having to work so hard. It's just a finger press to start and to stop. Okay, we've got our opposite sides, so that means we're going to be doing the 2 opposite sides, alternate ones. So we can go to 4, and it really wouldn't matter if we did 4 or 5 in this case, but we'll stay with the consistency of the numbers just to be safe. Beginning here with Unit B, we'll notice that the first two pieces, 1 and 2 of this unit, are a half square triangle. So we'll be assembling it as if we are doing that normally, but we're going to use this seam line as a guide so that we have it exactly the size we need in the piece that we want it to be. So I've stacked all of my fabrics right side up so I don't get any confusion from our transfer from the cutting table. That made some sense to me. So we're going to start with B1 is our medium. This is going to be the one piece out of each one that's going to be our medium piece, and the other 3 pieces are white. So we're going to start with this right side down. Again, start a little folded piece, and we're going to align it so it's 1/4 inch from the edge. And we'll take our next piece, the white, or a background, in my case it's white this time, and align these together. So as if we were going to be sewing them together on a machine as a half square triangle, 2 triangles together to form a square. But we'll use our paper because we'll get the exact size and the exact shape that we need for our little block. So let's bring it to the machine. We've got the same amount of material behind the paper, and we'll open it up to sew this seam. We're going to stop before the seam allowance and trim that off. Give it a quick press. When we open it, we can see already the half square triangle. It's a teeny tiny one, and we're not sure what the actual measurement of that square is, and it doesn't matter because it's sewn to the paper and will be the size it should be. Okay, we'll move on to number 3. And we'll add each of these 2 additional triangles to create the 4-piece triangle. Once all your units are completed and pressed really well with your best press or similar product, we'll be trimming the paper edges so that we get the size we need for construction. So our Unit A block is a square, and we'll be doing the square up using the 1/4 inch lines on our ruler on the straight line of the pattern, so that the edge that we'll be cutting is the dashed edge of the paper. We want to make sure it's as square as possible, so we're going to use a diagonal line to come through the intersection, and you'll see it's not an exact size. It looks like it's close to a 3.5 or something, but we're just going to go with the 1/4 inch seam allowance using that 1/4 inch line on the ruler, ensuring that we have seam allowance outside of that line. So we'll trim this tidily, nice and securely. And then rotate 180 degrees and do the same. So the 1/4 inch line along the top here, the dots along this side, and the diagonal line through so that it goes into the intersection of that opposite corner. All right, get lots of good pressure on there. I'm going to make sure I have a finger at least on the mat on one side, and good pressure. Going to white knuckle it so it doesn't move. Carefully with a very sharp rotary cutter. And we have our square ready to sew. And we'll remove the paper from this piece, working from the back, the last number of piece added, scoring, and then tearing it gently. So remove all the pieces of that pattern piece to get that ready. In the meantime, we'll trim these Unit B blocks. And I think what I'm going to do, just because there's always something new to learn in this process, rather than remove the paper from all the sides, since we're going to be putting it on the outside of our square here, if we only trim the side that we're sewing, we'll have extra to square up later. That's my theory at this point. So I'm going to give it a try. You can watch along and see if this is a successful decision. So again, we have these seams that we're going to be sewing. These will be squared up later by not removing that seam edge right now. So what I mean by that is taking our triangle and only cutting the side that's going to be added to the square. Again, we can use the 1/4 inch of the ruler so that we have that on the solid line, and we'll be adding the 1/4 inch seam allowance by trimming this. Now again, we can use lines on our ruler. So I have a diagonal line up here. I may as well just put that right on this line, a dash, because that's exact. And we'll slide it down until we have the 1/4 inch, which means this line is going to go right through this point. So as many lines as we can use to set it up, the more accurate our piece will be. And in miniature piecing, that's really crucial. Okay, so I'm only going to remove this edge of our seam allowance. We'll trim this after we've assembled the block. So do this for all 4 of your pieces, Unit B, and then we'll go to the sewing machine. Remove the one side, the long side of each of these pieces, and then remove the paper of all of them, and we'll assemble the block. Tidy. I just put a pin in the halfway mark, and I think I'll do the same for here. So I'm going to fold this in half because we're going to add to the opposite sides. Mark the 1/2 inch here, or the point where that little star triangle square, point, square on point. It's been a long day. Whew, where that is. And then we're going to align one of these on each side. So let's flip this to put it right side here and match this up with that point in the star, or sorry, in the pin. And I've got a pin down here, so I'm going to take advantage of this mark and set that point of the triangle on there. Now we can add some of these fancy dancy little clips to keep things in place on either side of the pin. Let's see if we can slide that up, just to hold things together till we get them sewn. I've changed, and as you should at this point, if you haven't, back to the 1/4 inch foot. And your feed dogs are active, I'm hoping. They probably should be for all of the other sewing you've been doing, or things would not be going together. Okay. I will use my foot pedal and go nice and easy. Going to give it a little bit of advantage, and so just to a thread or two from the thread intersection I can see underneath that pin. Not too much bulk there, so that's good. Okay, we've gone beyond our center square, so let's take a look at this seam. More rumbling. Oh! thunder knocked my piece right off the counter. Here we go. So if we fold this back, and I'm just going to push the fabric underneath, you can see that we've got a really nice crisp match of this corner triangle in line with this triangle of the square. All right, that looks great. Okay, let's do the same for the other side. We'll take a unit B and flip it over so that it's going to align with our pin. And we can use all of these angles here to make sure that it's all even all the way across. It's a bit of a shadow here with the less light from the day being almost done. We'll set this up here. Throw a few clips on until we get it under the needle. When I put the needle down and lift my foot up, it just allows all of these pieces that are overlapping to fall into place and allow gravity to just settle things down. Even though it's the slightest of weight, it just relieves all the pressure of any that has been created by the machine to that point. So we can just work through just to the right of where the thread intersection is, if you can see it in the tiny, tiny hole of your machine. That gives space for the fabrics to fill in when we fold it back. Machine piecing with these teeny tiny pieces, so miniature machine quilting is very precise, especially when it comes to the bulk. So you can see that these intersections are very, very close, and hopefully we've left enough in here for this to fall back and create space so that it's not pinched. So this time I folded it so the seam allowance is going towards this triangle, and it lays just as nicely as if I folded it towards the center. So for the first two pieces we add, we're going to fold them into the center because that's the way that they will want to go due to the increased bulk on the triangle added as opposed to the strip that's there. There's quite a bit of bulk inside here, but it'll kind of flatten out with the weight and the starch and won't be so noticeable until you actually stitch, and you're likely not going to stitch right in that spot if you're machine quilting it. So we'll give this a press and then we'll add the other two pieces. Let's do it on the lines of the mat. Why not? It's amazing the number of tools that we actually have to our disposal when we look around. Every tool that we have has multiple purposes. So let's see. I'm going to use the line of this ruler or mat to create the pin mark that I need. All right. We'll flip this on and the other side and come back to see the finished product before trimming up. Here's our almost finished Jack in the Pulpit block. Because we didn't trim the pattern piece edges of our outside triangles, we'll be doing that in this process, the squaring up this time. So we'll measure through and see where the 1/4 inches are going to be. If we align this mark here along one edge, we're going to add a 1/4 inch here and a 1/4 inch on this side. And we'll look for this diagonal to go directly through the points of our medium triangles here. So that looks pretty nice and straight. See, things are just a little skew. So we'll do our best to get a 1/4 inch on these 2 points. I'm aligning these dots here. I'll just use this pen. I'm going to align this line. I'm going to align this line best as I can and do the square up as we would with any typical block that we've been piecing. Use my smaller cutter since it's a small block. And again, a very heavy hand and very securely held ruler to the mat. Okay, let's rotate 180 degrees. And this time we should be able to use the 4.5 inch mark here and here with the diagonal. Let's set that up first. That would be our typical squaring up method for any block pieced. And we can confirm that we have a dot for a 1/4 inch line up to the top and across the top here. So we're just going to take this little bit off that we might have of each of those pieces. But in doing so at this stage, by leaving them to the end, I think we're going to get a much better even square. Let's take a look at my sample. Which was done by trimming the edges of the paper to the seam allowance first. And you can see there's just a little bit of discrepancy sometimes where these intersections meet. This isn't as tidy. So I think this is a successful experiment, and perhaps we'll try it in some of our future blocks. Always things to learn. I'm learning as much probably as you are, or maybe more. Hope you've enjoyed doing the Jack in the Pulpit and look forward to more blocks we do together.